What's up guys, hope you're doing well and welcome back to the channel. So we're going to be doing a lot of cool stuff in this video. We're going to be contacting our API for the first time, meaning we're going to be reaching out to the internet, fetching all of this data about our Pokemon, importing that into our application, and then using that information to start constructing our Pokemon in our project. So we're going to be doing stuff like creating custom classes. We're going to be writing the code to reach out to this our API. And I'm going to be going through everything in a step-by-step process so that you guys don't get lost along the way. So let's go ahead and get started with Xcode now. I hope you guys are excited and ready to go. Okay guys, so what I want to get started with is our Pokemon class. So we're going to go up to our model folder, just hit Command N, and then we are going to create a Swift file and we're going to call this Pokemon. So create, and let's go ahead and import UIKit right now. Say class Pokemon, open and close bracket, and let's stop and talk about what this is for a second. So if we go back to our completed application, we notice that each one of these cells contains a Pokemon, right? So each one of those Pokemon has a specific set of attributes. In this case, we're only displaying an image and a name. But if we were to click on this, we see a bunch of other attributes or stats about this Pokemon, the description, what it evolves into, type, height, weight, so on and so forth. So all of these attributes are going to be contained within this Pokemon class or our model, right? So, and what we're going to do later on is we're going to contact our API, or where all of the data for our Pokemon exists on the internet. We're going to bring that data into our application and then use it to set all of the values that we create in this Pokemon class. And then we're going to update our controller with each one of those Pokemon and the corresponding attributes. So this is sort of like the blueprint for our Pokemon, right? So all the attributes that a Pokemon has needs to be defined or declared in this class. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we're going to say var name, which is a string. And actually, let's make this optional. And for those of you who don't understand what an optional is, it's essentially saying that this value could be a string or it could be equal to nil. And because we're fetching this data from the internet, we want to be safe about it and say that, okay, in case we don't get something back, this value can be nil instead of, whereas if we were to put an exclamation point there, we're telling our application that it has to contain a name. But because we're reliant upon an internet connection, and not only that, but our server being up and running or the information existing on the server, we want to make that optional just in case something goes wrong. Okay, so we're going to create a couple other guys here. So image URL string optional, image, which is a UR image optional, var ID int, and then let's see. Now we need weight int, height int, defense int, attack, which is an int, description, which is a string, type, which is a string, and base experience, which is an int. Okay, so now let's go ahead and initialize this Pokemon. Okay, so that might not make sense to you now if you're not familiar with object-oriented programming yet, but we'll see how this comes into play later on. So right now we're just going to say init ID, which is going to be an integer, and then we are going to say dictionary string any object. Okay, so this is going to be a little tedious, guys, but we're going to get it done. So basically we just want to say, actually, yeah, let's keep it like this. We can always change it later, but this should be okay for now. So basically we want to say if let name equals dictionary name as string self.name equals name. So essentially what this is saying, guys, is we're going to pass in a dictionary when we create this Pokemon, right? And a dictionary is essentially going to have a key, which is going to be that name guy, and then it's going to have a value, which will be the actual name of the Pokemon. So in this case, it would be Bulbasaur. So we would have this dictionary, and it would say name Bulbasaur, attack 49, defense 49. So essentially, what this is doing is it's safely checking for that name value, right? So it's saying if this name value exists, store it in this property name, and then we're going to say self.name equals name. So this name guy up here is then going to be set to this name that we checked for in our dictionary. So then when we do something like say Pokemon or self.name, like we could say Pokemon.name, and whenever we call that or create this Pokemon, it will return that name Bulbasaur for us, right? So let's keep going with this. I'm just gonna copy and paste this guy. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So we have to do this 10 more times, or 9 more times, because we don't have to do it for the ID. So this, oops. So that's, okay, so let's just start there. So now we're gonna say, this is gonna be a lot easier to do it this way. So image URL, self.image URL. Just keep doing this, guys. That we don't have to worry about this image or that ID, but we do need the weight. So weight, 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 weight. Same thing for height. Defense. Okay, and really quick, for the weight and stuff, we can't cast it as a string. We need to cast it as an integer. So let's see, int. Okay, so that's good for now. Attack also needs to be an integer as int, and then description is going to be a string. Type is also going to be a string. Okay, I think that's good for now. Don't worry about base experience for now. So guys, I'm going to open up our API really quick before we move forward so we can see how this is making sense. So this is what our data looks like in Firebase, okay? So essentially, this is our dictionary for our Pokemon, right? So when we check for like this name guy, it's going to go through this dictionary and it's going to say, okay, here's name, give me back Bulbasaur. So what's going to get stored in this property here is Bulbasaur, and then it's going to say, okay, you created this Pokemon, you gave me this dictionary, which is what is everything you see here, and then it looked for name, got back Bulbasaur, stored it in that property, and said, okay, this Pokemon's name is Bulbasaur. And it's the same for all of those other properties, right? Attack, defense, description, weight, all that stuff. So this is all we're going to be doing for now. This is our Pokemon class, so I'll actually go back here and we need to do this ID guy as well. So we're going to say self.id equals ID. And we're not going to be getting this ID from our API because we're going to see how we get that a different way. We don't need it from that dictionary, but when we initialize our Pokemon, it's going to require us to pass in that ID and then a dictionary, and then it's going to set all these values for us accordingly. So let's go ahead and get started with what we need to do to contact our API and then to actually construct one of these Pokemon, okay? Okay guys, so what we're going to do now is hop into our service folder, hit Command N, select Swift file, and we're going to call this file service, okay? And what we're going to do is create a class called service, and we are going to write a function called fetch Pokemon. So this is the function that we're going to call in our Pokedex controller here. That's going to contact our API, give us back all that data. We're going to parse it, create all our Pokemon, and then do what we need to do with the Pokemon from there, which is going to be loading each one into these collection view cells. So let's get started with what we need to do. So first things first, we need to know what URL, where our data is located, and we get that through our URL. So if we go back here, this is what the data looks like in Firebase, which is like this service that's run by Google that allows you to store information on the internet. And it's printed out all nice and fancy. Like you can see everything is very clear here, but that's not what the data looks like in its raw form. What that looks like is what you see here. And this is what's known as JSON, or JavaScript Object Notation. So we're going to be contacting this API, importing all of this data from when we get that result back from that API call, which we're going to get from this URL. Then we're going to parse all this data, create our Pokemon, and go from there. So really quick, so we can get a better understanding of what this looks like. Actually, sorry guys, we'll do that later. Let's just grab the URL for now. So it's going to be this. You guys don't have to worry about this. You can just download the source code and get this value. So we're going to say let base URL equal this. And this is the URL that you're going to want to use. That contains the location of all this data. So now that we have this, this is actually just represented as a string. So what we need to do is convert that string into a URL. So we're going to say guard let URL equal URL from string, and we're going to pass in that base URL and say else return. So for those of you who have never seen a guard statement before, or kind of confused about what they are, it's basically checking to make sure that we set this URL parameter or constant, and if it doesn't work, it's going to return out of this function and stop execution at this line 17 right here. So basically, it's just a safe way of making sure that we get this URL before we move on with executing the next line or next portion of our code. So now what we want to do is begin a URL session. So we're going to contact this URL, and we're going to do it like this. We're going to say URL session.shared.dataTask, and you're going to want to use this with URL and completion handler. Pass in that URL we just created, and then you hit enter on that completion block. So now we're going to create references to these guys here. Data response error. So first things first is to handle our error, right? So this is what's going to happen if our API request fails. Okay, so we're going to say if let error equals error. We're going to say print failed to fetch data with error, and then just do end quote comma error dot localized description. Okay, and then we're going to want to say return at the end of that. It's similar to how we did this in our guard statement. Basically, we're saying if this error exists, store it in this property, and then give us this print statement, and then stop execution of our function right there, because we don't want to hit this error and then keep going on with our code because it might cause a crash. So let's keep going. So now we need to get our data. So we're going to say guard let data equal data else return. So that's the data that we're going to get back from our API, which is all of this stuff. Okay, so that's making sure that we actually get that data back, right? And if we don't, again, stopping execution of that function right there. We're trying to be as safe as possible with this. So now we need to say this. We need to say do. And this is a little confusing, and I'm going to type it out and then go over exactly what it means. So we're going to say result array equals try JSON serialization.json object with data. And we pass in this data that we just created. Options is going to be an empty array. And then we're going to say as question mark square bracket any object else return. Get that there. Okay. And then we need to implement a catch statement. So we're going to say catch let error print failed to create JSON with error. And we can just say colon space close bracket comma error dot localized description. Okay, so what the heck does this mean here? Right, so I want to hop back into what I said I was going to do really quick before we got started with that code. So I'm going to just copy and paste all of this JSON data, and then I'm going to go to this like really cool formatter. The URL is jsonformatter.curiousconcept.com, and you can paste all of this stuff in there, hit process, and it processes all that JSON data for you and makes it like expandable and collapsible and stuff like that. So this is all of our data, right? So we can see it's this big object, and that object is just an array, right? So that's how all of our data is represented. So when we hop back into our code, we are taking the data that we got back from that URL, which is all of that raw data. And then we're saying, okay, we need to turn this into JSON, right? We need to organize that data so that it's readable in our code, right? So that's where we use this JSON serialization.json object, and we pass in this data that we get back from the API, okay? And then we cast it. This is the most important part here, guys. We cast it as this array that is of any object. So basically it's casting it or saying, hey, read all of this data as an array of any object, right? Because this is no like object in particular. It's not an array of strings. It's not an array of dictionaries. It's just kind of this big, massive array of data. So that's how we cast it. And then we store all of that in this result array. And again, we do that with a guard statement just to make sure that our code is safe, okay? So what I'm gonna do now is gonna say print results array. And we're gonna go ahead and call this function and see what this stuff actually looks like. And the reason it's in a do statement is because you have to implement this try guy here. So anytime you have a try, it has to be followed by a catch. So it's what it's saying is, hey, try to do this, and if it doesn't work, it hits this catch statement. And anytime you have a try statement, it has to be implemented within a do statement. So I know that's a little confusing, but that's just how it works. So let's hop into our Pokedex controller and see if we can call this function and get back our data and print it out to our console for now. So I'm gonna go here, and actually let's go up here. Make a mark for our API, and we're gonna say func fetch Pokemon. And what we want to do is call this service guy and then call that fetch Pokemon function. So we're going to say service.fetch Pokemon. But you guys are going to see that it's going to ask us for like an instance of that service class because this has not been initialized yet. So what we need to do is go back here and say static let shared equal service. Okay. So this is essentially, oops, that's in the wrong place. Do it on a class level. Okay, so what this is doing and is creating a shared instance of this class, so we can say service.shared and then access this fetch Pokemon function. And it's we say static because we want to make sure we're only implementing a single instance of this class, so that we don't have a bunch of API calls all over the place in our application, because that could get really messy, take up a lot of memory, calls could interrupt each other, or it could cause a lot of traffic in your application, and that's not good. So you want to implement this in a singleton fashion is what it's called. So now we hop back to our Pokedex controller, and we can say service.shared.fetch Pokemon, and it's not going to ask us for that input parameter anymore. So now what we want to do is go up to our viewDidLoad function and just say fetch Pokemon. And let's go ahead and run this. Let me run it on, yeah, XR is fine. And see what we get back from our API, guys. So let me bring this over here. 1 second. Okay, so we ran our code and unfortunately we did not get anything back. So let's try and figure out why. Okay guys, so let's hop back into our service class in our fetch Pokemon function. Go ahead and click on this this bracket here that is the opening bracket for our URL session, and go down to the bottom and say .resume, okay? So what this does is if this data task gets suspended because of like a connection interruption or for whatever reason it might be, it hits this guy, this function, and then resumes that data task. So Swift requires us to implement that to execute a successful URL session. It's just it's just how the framework functions. So one more thing that we need to do is because this information is just like on a random URL, by default, our project doesn't allow us to just bring in that sort of information from some random URL like this, right? So hop into our info plist, go up to the top, hit this plus, and start typing out app transport, and make sure you capitalize these letters accordingly. And you're gonna see app transport security settings come up, hit enter, hit that down arrow, then go and hit the plus button by app transport security settings, and you're gonna see allow arbitrary loads come up. So we need to change that value to yes. Okay, so now if we go back to our service, all this is looking good. Go ahead and run your project, and we should see all of this data being printed out in our console. And that's exactly what we get back. So get excited, guys. That is us successfully contacting our API and importing all of the data into our project after we successfully parsed that information. So now let's go over what we need to do to actually create our Pokemon, which is our custom object. So I'm gonna go ahead and type out all the code, and then I'm gonna go over it after we see it working. So we're gonna say for key, comma, result in results array dot enumerated. Then we're gonna say if let dictionary equals result as a dictionary that's of type string any object. Let Pokemon equal Pokemon capital P, and this is where we initialize our Pokemon, pass in that key, and then the dictionary that we just created there. And then let's go ahead and say print Pokemon.name. So let's go ahead and see if this works. And then once we see it working, I'm gonna go ahead and explain what's going on here. So that's looking super good, guys. So we're getting back the names of all of our Pokemon in our console. So what this means is that we successfully parsed the information for each one of our Pokemon, and then passed in the required information to create our Pokemon, which is a custom object that we created up here. And then we were able to print out our Pokemon's name through saying print Pokemon.name, right? So what the heck is going on here? If you're a beginner, this might look really intimidating and really confusing, but I'm going to explain it to you now. So if we hop back in to our JSON formatter, right? We remember that this guy here was just an array that is represented by any object here, right? So that was our first cast of information, right? So what's going on is that each element in this array, this is the data for an individual Pokemon, right? So the first element we see is for Bulbasaur. The second element we see is for Ivysaur, so on and so forth. So what we do is we create a for loop to loop through each one of these elements. And then what we do is we take all the data, parse it into a dictionary, and then create our Pokemon accordingly, right? So let's hop back into our code and see exactly what that means. So let's start with this for loop. So I just explained how we loop through each one of these objects in our result array. So that's what's represented by this result. The key is represented by what element we are at in our loop. So this null guy is the 0 element because in case you didn't know, programming starts counting at 0. And then this next guy is our first element, then second, third. So Bulbasaur is 1, Ivysaur is 2, Venusaur is 3. So those are going to be their Pokemon IDs. So that's why we pass in this key guy here when we ask for our Pokemon ID, right? So that's what this for loop does for us. And we have to say dot enumerated so that we get access to that key parameter. If we don't, it won't recognize what that is. So then what we do is, let's go over this block of code here. So this dictionary is what's represented by all of this information here, right? So this is for the first, so our loop, when it gets here, it says, okay, cast all of this information as a dictionary that's of type string in any object. So all of these keys here are strings, and then we see that we have like a bunch of different types of data types here. We have integers, we have strings, we have arrays. So that's why our dictionary is of type string in any object. And if you guys remember from our Pokemon class, that's what we did. That's how we told our class that that's one of the parameters we required to initialize our Pokemon class with, a dictionary of type string any object, and then this ID, right? So we're saying, okay, when we get to this first element here, parse or like cast all of this information as a dictionary that is of type string any object, and then we instantiate this Pokemon, right? And then we pass in the according values, and then we can then say print out our Pokemon.name. So if you guys remember from my explanation previously, our Pokemon name, it goes through that dictionary, finds that name value, and then sets this self.name guy, right? So then when we say Pokemon dot whatever attribute, in this case it was name, it gives us back the Pokemon's name, which is what we saw here in our console. So that's the explanation of what's going on there, guys. I know it's a lot, but especially if you're a beginner. But you should give yourselves a huge pat on the back. This is super exciting. We successfully contacted our API, successfully parsed the information we got back from that, and used that information to construct a custom object, which is our Pokemon here. So everything is working really nicely. I'm going to stop this video here, and in the next one, we're going to go over what we need to do to start populating our collection view with all the data that we just got back, right? So get excited for that, guys. That's what we're going to be doing in the next video. Please subscribe to the channel if you like my teaching style, if you like the material I'm posting. Throw this a like, subscribe, help me grow this channel. I hope you guys are liking my style and the material that I'm posting. So we'll see you in the next video where we're going to be populating that collection view. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Peace out.